We need more people to wake up, get off the sidelines, stop complaining.
My mother was the most convicted atheist I've ever met. There really was no God in my house.
I'm joined by one of the sharpest and most creative minds in conservative media.
Stephen King called him the most original novelist of crime and suspense.
Host of the Andrew Klavan Show for the Daily Wire.
Talking to God, and I'm saying, you know, you've done all this stuff for me, and I'm nobody. What can I do for you?
And build these institutions that need to endure for the next generation that comes after us.
Now's the time to stand in truth. Stand up and speak.
How do we teach our kids to build moral muscles?
There's a fire in faith.
Most of all, we need people to take the risks that artists take.
We've been quiet too long.
The left has already given up on freedom. Oh, it's misinformation if you disagree with them and shut you down.
Stand up and speak.
We need to have a revival of the American spirit.
Giving up on freedom is a big, big mistake.
Spent much of his life as an agnostic, and yet somehow, through the power of story, found his way not just to faith, but to Christ.
And we need artists like that. It's not going to be conservatives who write novels. It's going to be guys like me, novelists who are conservative. Great revolutions don't come from revolutionaries. They grow out of great traditions. I want to be in a place where every man who chooses to love this country chose to love this country. We had broken the stranglehold of the media.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. When they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Gates Garcia, so that's no excuse.
Today on We the People, I'm joined by one of the sharpest and most creative minds in conservative media, author, screenwriter, and storyteller, Andrew Klavan. So, from Hollywood to the Daily Wire, from thrillers to theology, Andrew Klavan's truth works in unexpected ways. He was raised in a secular Jewish home in New York, spent much of his life as an agnostic, and yet somehow, through the power of story, found his way not just to faith, but to Christ. That alone would make for a powerful conversation. But what makes Andrew's story even more compelling is that he didn't stop there. He took that faith and infused it into his craft. He's written award-winning thrillers, adapted novels for Hollywood, authored profound works like The Great Good Thing and The Kingdom of Cain, and helped shape one of the most successful conservative media institutions of our time, the Daily Wire. As we sit here 10 years into that movement, we're also watching the broader decay of Western culture. We've ceded the arts, the universities, and Hollywood to the left, institutions that used to be filled with beauty, craftsmanship, and a belief in truth. Conservatives have spent decades reacting instead of creating, boycotting instead of building. But if the left tears down, shouldn't it be our instinct to build back up, to create, to imagine, to restore what was good, true, and beautiful? Andrew Klavan has done exactly that. He's lived the journey from critic to creator, and he's done it with courage, intellect, and faith. In this conversation, I want to explore that full arc. How a secular writer became one of the most thoughtful Christian voices in modern media. How darkness and art can actually lead us toward the light. And how we as conservatives can stop sitting on the sidelines, canceling and complaining, and instead start creating culture again. We'll talk about this powerful reflection in The Kingdom of Cain, where he argues that confronting darkness honestly can actually prepare us to face it, and how that message applies to fathers, leaders, and citizens trying to raise the next generation in a world that often glorifies darkness for its own sake. And then we'll look ahead to his new novel, After That, The Dark, a story that explores love, redemption, and the struggle to leave a past life behind. It's a tale that mirrors not just the life of its protagonist, but in many ways, the story of America itself, a nation wrestling with its own identity, trying to find light after dark. So, from Hollywood to the Daily Wire, from thrillers to theology, Andrew Klavan's story is one of transformation, imagination, and faith in action. And he's here to talk about it. Andrew, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, and thank you for that nice introduction. I appreciate it.
So as we sort of work this conversation into your prolific writing, I think it's sort of important to kind of build a background of where you come from, because our stories sort of shape what comes out of our minds and our mouths and our keyboards. And so I would love to start from this story of a man raised in a secular Jewish home in New York City who's become one of the leading voices in the Christian movement. How does that happen?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure myself. I was raised in a home, in a Jewish home, and my father, it was very important to my father that we were trained in the rituals of the faith, that we went to Hebrew school, that we were bar mitzvahed. My mother was the most convicted atheist I've ever met. I mean, she was a woman who lived and died without caring at all about anything that she couldn't see, hear, and feel. But my father had a sort of relationship that, there was this gigantic, Jewish guy out there who could kill you with a thought. So he didn't want to get too sassy with him. But there really was no God in my house. We never talked about what God might want from you. We never talked about, how we were trying to achieve God. We just went through the rituals. So I was completely alienated from Judaism from the very beginning because it was an empty palace. It was a beautiful religion, but there was nothing inside it. And I had no idea why I was reading Hebrew, why I was wearing these funny hats, what any of that was all about. By the time I was bar mitzvahed, I was completely estranged from it. About 6 months after my bar mitzvah, I took all the gifts that I had gotten, which was thousands and thousands of dollars of savings bonds and gold pens and gold watches. And I actually snuck outside one night and stuffed them in the garbage because I felt that I had been paid for lying. I felt like I was getting money for being dishonest. But the thing is that all I ever wanted in life was to be a novelist. All I ever wanted to do was write and tell stories. And it became clear to me fairly early on that all of the great stories were infused with Christianity. And so one day, we didn't have a New Testament in the house, so one day I went out and bought one, and I started reading the Gospel of Luke. My father walked in on me while I was doing this, and I'm just going to be dead honest. I was 15 years old. I was sexually active. He could have walked in on me with a girl. He could have walked in on me just reading porn. He walked in on me reading the Gospel of Luke, and he was furious. I mean, he was just furious that I would let the enemy into the house, the Christian enemy into the house. But what happened ultimately was that I understood. I mean, the poet William Blake said the Bible is the great code of art. And I understood that everything that was in this book was what powered the art that I loved. And so I started studying it. I wrote a novel about Jesus, but I wrote it as if he were totally a human being and just kind of explained him away. And meanwhile, all of that going on, I went through a very troubled period of life. I had a very tough relationship with my father, and ultimately it made me very miserable and depressed. And when I was close to 30, a couple of years short of 30, I just cracked up. And by that time, I had come to realize that if there was a moral order, and I was certain there was a moral order, I was certain that some things are wrong and some things are right, and there's no relative reality and all that stuff was nonsense. I understood that, but there had to be a God. But I was so miserable that the idea of reaching out to God felt like getting a crutch. It felt like giving in. That's how stubborn I am. Instead of reaching out when I needed it, I thought, no, that would be the wrong thing to do. But through the grace of God, I went into therapy with a psychiatrist who may be the only psychiatrist on earth who ever cured anybody. And I may be that guy. I mean, I'm the guy who he cured. I went in there suicidal, and I mean seriously considering ending my life. And I came out of there like 2 years later. I was a happy man. I mean, not just a happy man, but productive, starting to become successful, at ease with myself. It was a miracle. I do believe that it was a miracle. And it took place in the sort of love I felt for the only mentor I've ever had in my life. And after that, as that started to settle in on me, it took a few years, but I started to think, you know what? My logic holds. My logic that there's a God holds. And I started to pray. I had no basis in prayer. I was not praying historical prayers. I just started talking to God. One night I said, my life had gone from, as I say, from suicidal to very joyful and successful and happy. And I just, one night as I was falling asleep, I said, thank you, God. Woke up the next morning, everything was different. Everything changed. I mean, I could just see everything more clearly. I was much more alert. I was much more awake and alive. I had at that point, I mean, I have a wife whom I have adored for 50 years, and I, could suddenly see her more clearly, my children more. And so I thought, well, that's a good thing. So I started to pray and just making it up, just talking to God, like, I don't know, can I ask for a car? How does this work, And after about 5 years went by, I realized that alone had transformed my life and had kind of cashed the check that therapy had written for me. Therapy had freed me from my past, but now I had become somebody that I never was before. And I was at this point writing screenplays. I was working in Hollywood for money and fun, and for my sins. And here I am driving a convertible BMW in the hills of Santa Barbara, like I'm a total jerk. And I'm talking to God and I'm saying, you've done all this stuff for me and I'm nobody. What can I do for you? And God, as if speaking, it was not a voice in my ear, but it was as certain as a voice, said, you should be baptized. I'm driving along, and out loud I went, you got to be kidding me. Why would I do that? It's going to ruin my Hollywood career. It's going to, at this point I'd made peace with my father, but we never really got along great. But I thought this will end my relationship with my father. But when I started to think it through, and I took about 5 months trying to convince God that he was wrong, I realized, no, God, funnily enough, turned out to be exactly right, and that I did have to become baptized. I was a Christian. And because of my literary studies of the Bible, which I had read 5 times without ever believing it, I knew about it. And I had a friend who was an Episcopal priest, and I went back and I reread the Bible as if it were true. And that's what kind of convinced me, oh, I get it now. That's when not only the book makes sense, but life makes sense. And that's how I became a Christian. I mean, I just thought that I have to be honest about it. And the ends of this story is quite dramatic, because I was thinking, I'm going to have to tell my parents, because I give interviews and things like that, and I don't want them to read it in the paper. But as I was about to tell them, my father became ill with his final illness. And I realized I'm not going to break his heart for no reason. And so I lived in California, they lived in New York, and this priest I knew lived in New York. So I was flying back and forth to see my father as he was failing, and then I would go leave his house and go over and see the priest. And my father died in the week that was both Passover and Easter, a Holy Week that actually combined with Easter. And shortly thereafter, I went back and I was baptized in a very quiet, private ceremony, and it changed everything. I mean, 3 weeks later, my wife, who knows me backwards and forwards, turned to me and she said, "You're a different person. A serenity has come over you that wasn't there before." And that, I hate to be annoying, but that has continued, and it has really deepened my life in ways that it would take me forever. This conversation would go on forever to talk about that. But that was the journey.
Well, and I could sit here and listen to that forever. The only part that would have made the story better is if you were in the BMW convertible and God told you needed to be baptized and it started raining.
That would have been insisting on being baptized. Yeah.
I'll also tell you, every 15-year-old kid that's doing something they shouldn't be doing in their room, it certainly hasn't gotten in trouble for reading the Bible like you have. I wish that's what my parents walked in on me doing at that age in the room. But it's so funny. I converted to Catholicism 8 years ago, and you mentioned the word happy there a couple times. I was a happy person, but I felt that my conversion to Catholicism turned me into a joyful person. Happiness to me is transactional. You can get quick little dopamine hits of happiness, but what God has given me is true joy and fulfillment in life. That doesn't mean there's not bad days, but I have joyness in my heart that there is something greater than me working through me to carry out a mission on earth. And that's sort of what I got through that conversion story. And you mentioned in there art a couple times, and you mentioned how the Bible and the New Testament sort of brought you here. And I sort of look at the Bible, I look at art as kind of the foundation for Western civilization, for Western culture. And as a 40-year-old man who maybe studies that stuff more than my other friends do, but sort of lives in a generation kind of in between the bedrock of Western civilization and maybe the next generation that could be foregoing that. It seems like we've ceded culture to a number of institutions, but Hollywood in particular, because the only way to communicate from one generation to the next is storytelling. You do that through your books, you do that through your other writings, you do that through your show. Why have we given that over to Hollywood? And Andrew, when did it happen?
Well, it's interesting. I moved to England in the 90s, and I lived there 7 years. I didn't mean to. I went there for a year, but I fell in love with it, and I just couldn't leave, And so, I came back, and 9/11 happened shortly thereafter, and I was watching TV And I would have said I was a man of the left at that point. I would have said I was a liberal. I was never a far lefty or anything like that, but I was a liberal. And I remember the comedian David Letterman coming on and saying, I really have to ask myself, why do they hate us? And I thought, what do you mean, why do they hate us? They're Nazis. They're Islamist fascists. Like, they're supposed to hate us. That's supposed to be our identity. We're the guys that the bad guys hate, And I realized that we had lost the culture. While I was gone, it had been happening and happening, but while I was gone, it had turned the corner. And I never wanted to be on camera. I never, writers are very solitary people. We like to be in a room by ourselves, like to open the door, throw the book out, close the door, go back to work, And that was kind of my dream. Even in my daydreams, I had a pseudonym so nobody ever recognized me. But I started to go around and just say to the only people who would listen to me, who were conservatives, we're not losing the country at the ballot box, we're losing at the box office. And that was, I could see it. I could see that our culture was infused, our arts were confused with self-hatred, and not self-reflection, not realization of guilt and sin, but actual self-hatred for the things that made us great, for the freedom that made us great, and for the religion that made us great. And it was just this kind of relentless pounding, especially on the middle of the country. Your religion stinks, your lifestyle stinks, your marriages stink, your women are enslaved, everything about you're racist, you're this and that. And I just thought, it's just not true. It's just not true. I was, for several years in my youth, I was a bum. I traveled, literally a bum. I traveled around, slept in hobo camps and all this stuff, and I met people all over the country. And as a guy who grew up on the coast near New York, it was a revelation. I realized, oh no, these people are wonderful. These are not the bigots I see in all the movies. These are not the bad guys. These are the people who will cross the street to help you if they see you in trouble. This is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I just thought, we have been battered, like abused into despising ourselves. And so, when Barack Obama was elected, and the first thing he said is, we're going to fundamentally transform this country. And I think, really, they hand you something that beautiful, and you think, like, I'm going to fundamentally, it's like marrying a girl and saying, I'm glad you're married, now I'm going to fundamentally transform you, And I just thought, and this is how I ended up like in front of cameras, because I just started talking about this. And I'm so frustrated about it. Listen, when I started, this is like 20 years ago and more, people looked at me like I was nuts, I used to say they look at me like my wife looks at me when I tell her that if you buy something on sale, it still costs money. My wife, I say that to my wife, and she looks at me like, you're cute and I like you so much, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And that's the way conservatives look to me. That has changed. They now get it. But there is this strain in conservatism of judgmentalism, of anger, of pessimism that simply can't fill the heart of artistic work. The guy who kind of made me a writer is Raymond Chandler. He's the great detective story writer, great American writer of the Philip Marlowe mysteries. And he said in all art there's an element of redemption. And you can write art about despair, but despairing art is very limited. And I think that, even now I get these letters from Christians saying, well, you had these two people sleep together and they weren't married. And I think, well, that happens. This is the world we're living in. I'm not writing about heaven. I'm writing about this world right now. And it's filled with bad guys. It's filled with good guys. And most of all, it's filled with people who are in between and looking and searching. And so there needs to be, the arts, as I keep saying, can only be saved by people who love them. And I think that partly because we've been blacklisted and abused and attacked, the right has stopped. Never mind the right, let's just say traditionalists and believers have stopped loving the arts. And so they don't know how to approach them. The one group of people who have sort of figured this out, especially in Hollywood, are Christians. And I used to attack Christian art because it was so happy and so brain dead, and like prayer always worked, and if you had faith, everything turned out all right. But I've stopped because that brings in crowds, and crowds bring in talent. And now you're getting a different level of work because they're attracted to the crowds. You're getting The Chosen, which is a really interesting and creative way of telling the life of Christ. You're getting a movie like Sound of Freedom, which, okay, it's not the greatest film ever made, but it's a good film, and it's a thriller film about a very dark subject, and it was a big hit. And so you're getting a different level of art. It's happening, but it's slow. And political conservatives are kind of the worst at it. They just can't let go of their systems and their ideas and understand that life is messy. You know, people who we deeply disagree with can be good people. People who vote in ways we don't like can be good people, and bad people can be people we agree with. You know, you can't write good stories until you accept the world as it is, and then write the world as it is. And then sometimes people can see the world as it should be through that. And so it's happening, but it's glacial. And I sometimes feel like I'm out here alone, but I'm not going to stop. So there's still me. that's one, and there are other people indeed. But it's just been a glacial change.
Hey guys, it's Gates. Thanks for tuning in. I'm asking you to like, share, and subscribe to the show. I hear that all the time when I watch and listen to podcasts. And now that I have a show, I know the difference that it makes. It really does boost us in the algorithm. And the better we do in the algorithm, the better guests we're going to get, the better content we're going to be able to produce. This show is not mine, it's yours. So in a way, you're helping yourself. So please like, share, and subscribe, and God bless. Yeah, one thing I've been critical of the conservative movement, of which I'm an unapologetic member of, is their criticism of culture. They're sort of criticizing from the sidelines. And, you know, conservatives have gotten really good at canceling. And I'm to blame here. We cancel Netflix. We cancel Disney. Okay, that's fine. But go out and then create culture.
That's it.
Build culture back up. It's the left that wants to tear institutions down. It's always been the right and the conservative mindset to build society back up. And I see us doing so much more tearing down in the arts than building back up. Now, that being said, I've had the founder of Angel Studios on this show. I've had Neil McDonough, who stars in a lot of their films, on this show. I built this show. I entered the arena because I was tired of being on the sidelines myself and said, I want to platform storytellers that are representing faith, family, and freedom in the cultural world like yourselves. And so we need more people to wake up, get off the sidelines, stop complaining. That's what we've never been about, and build these institutions that need to endure for the next generation that comes after us. Now, you've done that. I want to congratulate you on Daily Wire, just celebrating literally last month 10 years. I mean, you're sort of an you're the OG of Daily Wire. I mean, you've been there. You've been there from the beginning. And what's fascinating about you, Andrew, is like you had already done it all. This is the most successful 10-year retirement plan I've ever seen in my entire life. So talk a little bit about what it took to build that. And we don't need to, you all have done a wonderful job with the new show, Friendly Fire, and there's plenty of places people can go on your platform for all the reflections, but maybe give me a snippet or two of life at the Daily Wire over the last 10 years. Did you think this is where it would be in 10 years?
Well, it's funny, my father was a DJ, so I grew up in radio, and I have a weirdly accurate assessment of broadcasting talent. And I was driving around in LA once and heard Ben on the air on this awful show he was on with, had two other people, and they kept shouting him down. And so he'd only get a chance to speak every now and again. And every time he talked, and I knew him a little bit, I'd bump into him at, conservative meetings and all this. Every time I talked, I thought, wow, this is a top level radio talent, and I told him so. I thought, like I said, they ought to take those two other people off the show because you're the show, And so he and my friend Jeremy Boring, they contacted me at one point and they asked me to start doing I was doing these satirical videos and they asked me to do those. And basically we kept getting kicked out of places until finally Jeremy and Ben said, we're just going to get money and do this ourselves. And they built the Daily Wire, and it was in Jeremy's pool house. He had a changing house, and it was a card table and a microphone. And Ben went in and did his show, and I went in and did my show. And I said to him, I don't think I can talk for more than 15 minutes, But the first day I walked in, I had just come back from visiting my son overseas, and I was so tired and jet lagged. I walked in, I'd forgotten my shoes. I was wearing like bedroom slippers. I thought, oh my God, I walked out of my house without my shoes. And because of Ben's talent and because of Jeremy's brilliant maneuvering, the thing took off like a rocket. So here I am, as you say, deep into a career as a writer, and I had been thrown out of Hollywood for my political opinions, basically, but I had had a good career in Hollywood for a few years, and so I'd done a lot of stuff. But suddenly, the one thing that I never daydreamed about, I'm being recognized. people are coming up to me. I walked into hotels and like 20-year-olds would swarm me. I said to Ben, I feel like Ringo Starr because you're obviously Paul McCartney, but I feel like I'm bringing up the rear here. But still, it was like a shock, and it gave a rebirth to my writing career, which I was delighted by. And I had to sort of get rid of it. At one point, Jeremy pulled me aside and he said, there are many different types of IQ, and your self-promotional IQ is 0. You have no idea how to promote. And that was true. I never promoted myself. I just hoped the books were good enough that people would buy them, And so I had to learn a lot of stuff. I had to learn a lot of different ways of being, in public, of understanding, that like you now are somebody that people see on the street. But the first 4 years, say, of the Daily Wire was me and Ben, and then we brought in Michael Knowles. Michael Knowles was the guy who would write my tweets for me. That's how he got in, and he would write my tweets for me. He was so good at it. I used to read my tweets to find out what I sound like. That's how good he was. So I would bring him on my show, and then he got a show. So then there was us. We spent those first 4 years arguing and laughing and, smoking cigars and drinking together. And there were times, so help me Gates, when I could feel like the Holy Spirit just hanging over us, going, this is an interesting conversation. You don't hear this stuff. And we all had different points of view and we all disagreed. And when Trump came along, we had massive fights about it. And it was bliss. It was just bliss. And I knew, because I'm older than everybody else and I had I'd had a lot of experience, I know that stuff doesn't last. And there was a point at which the thing became so successful that it became corporate. But still, we remain friends, and it remains a wonderful organization. And it's been bliss. It has really been one of the, and as you say, an amazing retirement plan, because it completely put a coda on my career that I was not expecting. And I wouldn't have missed it for the world, and it's been great. And I think, and you know what? The day that Trump was reelected, not because he was Donald Trump, but because they had done everything they could to stop him, I realized that the fight that I had entered into was won. We had broken the stranglehold of the media, of the left stranglehold on the media. And that was an amazing moment. It wasn't all about, I was happy Trump was elected, but it wasn't all about that. It was just that we had beaten them. They had done everything. And me and Ben and Matt and Michael and Megyn Kelly and Joe Rogan and all this new media that had grown up had broken the grip that these guys had on the culture. And I think what I'm frustrated by now, and but still very, very hopeful, is that we haven't leapt into the space. We've got all these people saying hateful things on the right now, guys who really didn't help out at all when we were fighting the fight. And it's now time for people. It takes love to build a culture. It really does. It really takes love to build a culture. And I think that that's where we should be. And we need money. We need venues. We need distribution. But most of all, we need people to take the risks that artists take. I mean, I risked my life and my livelihood. I've done it many times, and sometimes I've lost that risk and had real setbacks. But always, I just thought, this is the thing that I was put on earth to do, and we need artists like that. It's not going to be conservatives who write novels. It's going to be guys like me, novelists who are conservative, who bring the arts, and that's what we need. And they've been chased away, so it's slow. It's like when black people were finally allowed to manage baseball teams. They opened the door. There was nobody waiting outside. Why? Because they're not idiots. They're not going to go through a locked door. They went off and did other things. But as they slowly realized the door was open, in came some of the great baseball managers of all time. I hope that's what's going to happen now.
Yeah, and it's been a wonderful contribution to the conservative movement and the country as a whole, because you all do focus on truth. You do focus on finding the truth by clashing ideas together. I mean, the new show, Friendly Fire, is for conservatives that agree on, 75, 80% of the issues, but I love listening to the 20% that you all disagree on, because that's the only way you do find truth in this world. And I think Donald Trump's second victory is the ultimate measurable outcome of organizations like Daily Wire that you've been successful. You could say that obviously a turning point as well. And Daily Wire proves that you can do well and do good at the same time. It's okay to start a business and be a capitalist and make money if you're truly returning good back onto the society, which you've done. So, all right, I want to get into your writing. I think everybody knows who you are, but if someone had listened to this episode or is listening now and didn't know who you were based on the things you've said, they probably think you're a Christian novelist. And you're in fact not. You write about very dark things. You write about crime, violence, and moral conflict. So I'd like to ask you, through even dark stories, how does that strengthen, not weaken someone's faith? You made the comment earlier that, I get criticism because I have two people sleeping together. Well, you made the comment, we live in a real world. We should write about a real world so people can react to it and have a response to it. So how does that affect your faith?
Well, when I was struggling with the fact that I had been called to baptism, one of my prayers, so help me, was, please, Lord, whatever happens, don't turn me into a Christian novelist. And the reason was I would see these stories, and it's like Susie lost her bunny, but Jesus brought it back again. And I thought, please, that, and the reason I don't like that, as I said, I've kind of softened toward it because I realize it brings people together, and that brings in talent who will do more interesting stuff. But the problem with that is life isn't like that. And if you tell people life is like that, and that's why you should believe in God, they feel cheated when the real stuff comes along. The point that I made when I wrote this book, The Kingdom of Cain, about evil in the arts, about the representation of evil in the arts, is that art about evil is not the same thing as evil. Art about evil is not evil. One of the greatest, most moving, and I would say most moral plays ever written is Macbeth, which is about a guy who kills his way to the throne. He kills children, women, he kills everybody. It's just a murder play. That's all it is. And yet you come away at the end, and at the end of the play, Macbeth makes one of the greatest nihilist speeches about how meaningless life is. He talks about life is meaningless. And what you realize is, it's not meaningless. He's left the source of meaning. He has undone creation. He is disconnected from the Creator, and he has come into a place of meaninglessness. And that is something that, not that long ago, I was having a struggle, as we all do, and I was thinking, I've lost a little bit of that joy you were talking about. I lost a little bit of that peace. And, I'm struggling with it and praying about it and all this stuff. Suddenly I realized, it's because I want something that I don't need to want. I want something I don't need that's beside God. If I just turn that ship around, And so if you can't depict that struggle, if you can't depict the real terrible things, I have Christians say things to me like nobody is born imperfect. And I think, have you seen the terrible things that happen to people who are born with horrible diseases? This world is a broken world. This is enemy territory, as C.S. Lewis said. And that's where we're living. We are waiting for the conquest, and we know it'll come, and we're assured it'll come. But in the meantime, art is about the world we live in. And that doesn't mean you can't have magic, and it doesn't mean you can't have fantasy, and it doesn't mean you can't have happy endings. But you also have to have sad endings. You have to write all those endings and all those stories so that people can see, I'm not alone. I mean, this is the biggest thing that art does. When I write a novel, what I want is you wake up at 3 a.m, you can't get back to sleep. You pull that novel off the shelf and start reading it, and you think, there's somebody else out there that I'm connected to. And you can't do that by lying. You just can't. Art has to be full of truth. And look, there are people who write happy stories. I have no problem with that. But I'm a crime writer. That's my gift. That's what I can do. And so I write about crime, and I write about the evil of crime, and I write about the fact that, a real murder mystery is not like Agatha Christie, where the body is in the library but nobody cares. A real murder is somebody dies, and I'm always taking a lot of care to depict that, to depict the fact that there's grief involved, and there's a sin that can't be fixed in this life, and that's reality. And if you don't deal with that reality, I don't know what your faith means. I mean, you're living in Candyland and have a faith in a Candyland God, but I can't do that. I can't do it. I have to believe in what I once called, one of my books, True Crime. There's a guy who says you have to believe in a God of the sad world, and I think that's what I think, because this is I'm a person who loves life, and I've been full of joy ever since my baptism, and even to some degree before. But this is a sad world, and I'm always cognizant of that. And so that's what I write. I write the world as it is, and I write the world as the place where I found God, which is this sad world.
Well, True Crime was like mildly successful, right? It was only turned into a Clint Eastwood movie. So I want to talk a lot about your new book, After That, The Dark, but I have to come back to a book that you mentioned because it ties into so many things that you just talked about, The Kingdom of Cain. You sort of argue that confronting darkness can prepare us for how to face it. That's a theme of that book. And I want to know, because a lot that comes up on this show is fatherhood and masculinity. And I'd like to know, how might that apply to fatherhood, leadership, or even civic life? For fathers listening, men trying to raise kids in a culture that glorifies darkness for its own sake. How do we teach our children to engage evil without being consumed by it? The sort of question that I really come to is like, how do we teach our kids to build moral muscles?
It's a really good question. And one of the things I talk about in The Kingdom of Cain, I'm actually quoting from a novel I wrote, which is a really good novel with a really bad title. It's called The Werewolf Cop. But I know it's a terror. I don't know why nobody stopped me from titling it that.
Is that a sequel to Teen Wolf?
Yeah, it is. Everybody makes that joke. It's like, I don't know what to say. I'd like to republish it under another name because it's really good. But there's a kind of dirty cop in it at one point who says, there's no such thing as good. What we think of as good is stopping evil. So doctors cure disease, firemen put out fires, cops arrest bad guys. We don't need these. The only reason these people are good is because they fight evil. It's the evil that's real. It's only the evil that's real. And of course, that's exactly the opposite of what I believe. I believe that it's only the good that's real, and the evil is the absence of that good. And so what The Kingdom of Cain is about real life murders that inspired lots and lots of art. So Ed Gein, I think there's a special one about him on Netflix now, but there wasn't when I was writing the book. But he killed women and dressed in their bodies. And that inspired the great film. They first inspired the novel Psycho, which became the Hitchcock film Psycho. It inspired the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It inspired Silence of the Lambs. Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs does that. And all of that inspired the slasher genre. So this is one guy with this sick, evil obsession has inspired all this work. Now, some of the slasher movies are trash, but some of them are actually fairly good. And the thing is, when a real artist takes something like Hitchcock making Psycho, creativity is almost always redemptive. I mean, creativity is what I call the telos of love, the purpose of love in life, right? The purpose of love is you have communion, and then you have creation. That's marriage is like that. And I think actually our relationship with God is like that. You receive the Holy Spirit through your faith, and then you become creative. You start to create, you become part of God's work. God created you, and now you're creating stuff in the world. Maybe it's a business, maybe it's a family, maybe it's just a life, just a way of living and seeing things that is absolutely original to you. And I think you get closer to that, the closer you get to God. So when a creator takes a murder and he starts to create something out of it, he actually is transforming evil into good. He's actually saying, okay, this is evil, it's real. Now I'm going to show you something beautiful. And The Kingdom of Cain ends in front of the statue of the Pietà by Michelangelo, which I think is the most beautiful statue in the world. It's unbelievably, if you've ever seen it, it's in the Vatican. It's just unbelievably, you can't believe that human hands made this thing. But when you think about it, it's the most evil thing you could look at. It's a mother who's lost her child. It's a world that's lost its God. It's a murder of a human, but it's a murder of God as well. It's the worst thing ever. It's Mary holding the dead body of Jesus in her lap, and it's the worst thing ever. And Michelangelo took that and made it into something that just breaks your heart with its beauty. And the question I ask in The Kingdom of Cain is, if a man can do that to something so tragic, what can God do with this tragic world? What is he making? What beauty is he making out of this world that's so full of darkness and ugliness? And so I think every work of art that is truly a work of art, there's lots of trash out there. I'm not, saying go watch every slasher movie and all this stuff, but there's some beautiful, beautiful art that's made about very dark stuff, is doing that. It's sort of hinting at what we're living through. We're living through an ugliness that is being turned into beauty. And I find that a beautiful thing. And that's why I look at all these works of art and sort of say, what are they really talking about here? What is Hitchcock talking about when he has some, naked girl stabbed to death in the shower? Why is that? How is that beautiful? And yet it is, because people you can't stop watching it. People just talk about the skill that took to make it, and I think it's a really profound thing. And so often the one thing that always falls badly on the ear is falseness, is lies. When you look at trashy movies, isn't the one thing you come out and say, the first thing, that would never happen. That's ridiculous. That's stupid. And yet you can go and watch a movie about fairies or magic or whatever and think like, oh yeah, that was great. That was a great movie because it did say something true, And so art about evil is really the opposite of evil in many ways. And I think it is profound what happens in that transition from destruction to creativity.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. What you say, evil is the absence of good. It's the same thing as saying, darkness is the absence of light. Right. I wanted to come up with more prolific sayings, but you mentioned American Psycho, and I can't get the picture of the head in the refrigerator out of my mind. That's a great movie. That takes me back. I haven't seen that one in a while.
There
Christian Bale,
yeah.
probably the best Christian Bale movie other than The Dark Knight. All right, so let's talk about your new book. I have a couple questions, but I do want to just allow you a platform to tell us about After That, The Dark. And let me tell my audience, dailywire.com/Klavan. There is a multitude of ways through that link to buy the book. So everybody go to dailywire.com/Klavan. But After That, The Dark. So word is yours.
This is a part of a series of mysteries. It's the fifth in a series of mysteries starring a guy named Cameron Winter. And frankly, I know this sounds self-serving, but it's actually not. I think people should read this book first. First of all, it's one of the best books I ever wrote. And I say that, as humbly as I know how, but it is just something I'm really, really proud of. And secondly, it really contains the whole journey of this guy. I invented Cameron Winter because I saw that every masculine man in really good stories since about 2000 has been an anti-hero. So you take The Sopranos, you take Breaking Bad, you take The Shield, you take The Wire. All of these are about Deadwood. Almost all of these great stories that arose on television were stories about men like the kind of men I was writing about back in the 90s in true crime, a bad man who has a purpose, who finds that he has a purpose even in his badness. So I wanted to create a guy who had been a bad guy. He'd been an assassin, essentially, for the government, who was trying to say, well, how do I not do that? How do you stop? You can't undo people you've killed. They can't bring them back to life. So how do I stop, and how do I become a better man? So in this book, he has had a kind of a breakthrough, and he's fallen in love. And it is a real love story, and I think it's a love story that people will really enjoy because the woman in it is an actual woman instead of one of these boss women who goes out and punches men and they fall down. She's an actual girl like you might meet. And so I think that's one big thing about her. And he goes out with this young lady, and he knows he's in love with her almost before he goes out with her because they just recognize each other. And she knows that he likes to solve murders. He likes to go out. So she tells him a story she knows. It's a real story about a guy who's killed in a locked cell. Nobody can get in. Nobody can get out. The people guards outside, and yet somehow he's shot in the chest and killed. And he, just to impress her, he wants to impress this girl, tries to solve this thing. And he opens up an incredible conspiracy that's truly dangerous and truly starts to close in on him, and is faced with the question now. He has tried so hard to get away from being an assassin. Who will he kill? Who is he willing to kill to keep the person he loves alive and himself alive and basically unwind this thing? And so it's a really fast-paced mystery and love story and suspense story. But it does deal with something that I think is the big question in the culture is how are men going to learn to be men again without following clowns like Andrew Tate and, abusers. I know this is the thing that really gets me about younger men. I think they bring me tapes by Andrew Tate, videos by Andrew Tate, and I say, this man is a pimp. You understand what that is? This is not the man you follow. This is the opposite of the man you follow. So this is a guy wrestling with those questions and wrestling with them in a real way, in a real world, and not in a Hallmark Cards way where everything works out. I think it's a really good suspense story, and I think men will like it, but I think women will like it too because it is a good love story.
It's refreshing to hear your take on Andrew Tate. Not that I didn't think it would be any different, but we sort of let the left remove men from society, and then the conservative movement, some in the conservative movement, allowed the wrong man to build the man back up in society. And I'm waiting for, and there are plenty of examples, but I'm waiting for the counter movement to Andrew Tate. There's plenty of us that don't like him, but I think someone really needs to step up and say, this is true masculinity. Masculinity is virtuous, and this is anti-masculinity. I don't like the term toxic masculinity, but if it does in fact exist, it is him. And he disgusts me.
Sure. Yeah.
So in America today, many feel, their former selves are sort of in the old world, or the old world is gone, and we're in the after that, sort of the play on the title of your book. Does Winter's story parallel to the larger American story? I mean, are a nation trying to sort of recast itself while the shadows of the past still loom? I just feel sort of an American story through Winter.
Yep, that's exactly where he is. He is a guy who went to serve his country. He actually went in as a patriot, and now he's just not sure whether the country he served was the country he wanted to serve. He has this mentor who recruited him, and he only goes by the name of the recruiter, and he is the country that, he's this kind of very stalwart guy. He's everybody's favorite character in the book because he's just a belligerent Christian who just hammers Winter, because Winter is an agnostic. He doesn't believe in anything. And but he went in there for that. That was the country he went in to fight for. And now he's asking himself, well, wait a minute. There are empty cities in the middle of the country. People are doing horrible things. Our leaders have detached themselves from the people they were supposed to serve. What was I doing, and what can I do now? And he's living in that world. And also, one of the things that I've tried very hard to deal with is to include the technology that is changing our lives. So in one of the books, for instance, I had a AI commit a crime that after I finished the book and while the book was in publication, AI actually committed. And I was watching TV and I went, wow, that's my book. It just happened, So I've tried to stay a couple of steps ahead of technology, and this one very much does that, but raises the questions that technology raises. I mean, I'm never somebody who says this is the end of days because Jesus said you don't know, and I just take them. Okay, that's the end of that. That's the end of that question, right? I don't know, but the choices that we're going to have to make at the end of days are already on the table. There's no question about it. Are we going to be human beings, or are we going to let this really weird idea of what a human being is take us over? I listen to these guys who talk about AI, and they say, well, it might be conscious. And you go like, no, it might not. It's not conscious. Only we are conscious, and it's going to be what we make of it. And as we see with the internet and all this, the porn, the evil, the disgusting stuff that just permeates the internet, it's up to you. It's just up to you. You're going to have to make the choice. What are you going to use? I love the internet. The fact that I can get Shakespeare on my phone is like a great blessing. But, you have to make those choices. And so Winter is making those choices in that world and in a culture, which I feel about our culture, has flatlined. It has reached the end of something. And now we're going to have to start to build it again. And that's very much the theme of all these books, is what are we going to build? And when you build something, it starts with who you are and what you are and what you want to make of it. And that's the thing. We have to first ask that question and then say, well, now that I know I'm on the right path, how do I start to create things?
So I'll get you out of here on this. I'm sort of obsessed with this America 250 theme. We always get hopped up on the 4th of July, and that was about 2 or 3 months ago, and then it kind of fizzles, and then we get hopped up on 4th of July again. But there's something different about this year, and I think that we should be, even though we're still 9 months away from the 4th of July, we should be really celebrating America. We should always celebrate America, but this is a special year, and we need to reflect throughout the year on what 250 years mean. I mean, most nations don't last this long. So with that sort of as the backdrop, in After That, the Dark, does it have a message for readers on the eve of America's 250th anniversary about maybe freedom and fighting for it? If there is that message in there, what would it be?
Well, this is one of the things that disturbs me. You're talking about Andrew Tate. The other thing that disturbs me is this giving up on freedom. And this is happening. The left has already given up on freedom. They want to censor us. They want to they want to say, oh, it's misinformation if you disagree with them and shut you down. But there's now this strain on the right. And in some ways, this anti-Semitic, nasty, hate-filled stuff, in some ways I'm less worried about that because it's spectacular, but I don't think it's powerful. But what I am worried about are these kind of intellectuals on the right who say, well, liberalism failed. Liberalism failed. This is a strain in Catholicism, especially right now. It's not the main strain, but it is a way of thinking. Liberalism has failed, and therefore we have to get rid of this idea of freedom. We have to get rid of this idea and go back to sort of throne and altar, where the Pope is going to be in his palace and the King is going to be in his palace, and they're going to run our lives for him. And I think that giving up on freedom is a big, big mistake. And I think that Jesus said that we render unto Caesar what Caesar's and unto God what is God's. And I don't want priests running my government, and I don't want the government running my churches. I think I want to be in a place where every man who chooses to love this country chose to love this country, and every man who finds God chose to find God. I'm ready to make those arguments. I'm not afraid of people who spew hate. I'm not afraid of people who make evil arguments. I'm ready to face all of them. I'm ready to say this is the truth. And I'm not afraid of that. Andrew Tate has a platform. I don't care if he has a platform. I just want the people who oppose him to have a platform as well. And I don't want that platform to be up, somebody up there telling us down here. I want us looking eye to eye. And so that freedom to me is where real manhood lies. Real manhood creates the world around itself. It's like a world in which women can be respected and treated well is a world that men are going to make. Because if the men aren't on board, it's not going to matter. What women do is not going to matter. And you build a world where, I like to quote John Wayne in his last film. I'm a big John Wayne fan. In his last film, he said, I won't be wronged, I won't be insulted, and I won't have someone lay his hands on me. I don't do that to other people, and I won't let them do it to me. And that to me is a really clear statement of what a free man sounds like. Not you are going to do something, but I don't do it to you, you are not going to do it to me. And that, when you have manhood like that, when you have strength like that, when you have courage to live up to that, you create a golden rule world in which women can also live with dignity and respect and fulfillment. And I think that only comes from a free people. That only comes from a free people. And, we have something. The British, for many, many years, had an instinct for freedom. I'm afraid they've lost it now, but they had it, and somehow they could live without a written constitution. But we have it written down, a system that limits the power of our leaders and puts the power in our hands. They keep calling it democracy. It's not. It's a republic. The founders hated democracy. What they wanted was a republic. And I just think that a republic provides an opportunity for manhood and faith and family that grow up from the ground up. And that's the strongest way. That's the reason we haven't lost our faith when so many other Western countries have. And so I think we ought to start thinking about that again and thinking about the systems that we have in place and stop giving lip service to, oh, you're threatening my democracy. This is what it says in the Constitution. And the Constitution is supposed to give the government all the powers it has. It has no powers that aren't listed in the Constitution. And so I think that these systems need to be celebrated. We need to return to our founders. All we hear is our founders held slaves. Oh, the slave. You go to their homes now, and that's all they talk about, the enslaved people. And I think hey, I'm interested in the slaves. But I came here because George Washington lived here. I came here because Thomas Jefferson lived here. These were great men, clearly brought together by God. You do not get Jefferson and Franklin and John Adams and Washington in a room on a dice roll. That's just not the way life works. You do not get those geniuses in a room by accident. So we've been given a gift, and when you're given a gift, you don't think, how do I fundamentally transform this? You think, how do I keep this gift bright and alive? And that's what I think we should be thinking about. And yes, that is very much a theme in the Cameron Winter books.
We need to have a revival of the American spirit as we go into our 250th anniversary.
Absolutely.
And That's what I feel like I got today with you. And everybody needs to go to dailywire.com/Klavan. Buy After That, The Dark. It's only been out literally a couple of days. Buy all the other books. I think everybody will be motivated to do that now. Andrew Klavan, this was a treat. I'm a better man for the conversation, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Gates. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. And they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Gates Garcia, so that's no excuse.